Welcome, one and all, to the 59th episode of the Interstice podcast. So, things to get out of the way to begin with. I wanted to say that for those who have any questions for me, this can be about life in Japan, life in general, doesn't matter. If you have a question for me, I'll put down all of my social information at the bottom of the video now, or if you are on Spotify or something like that, the contact email address is contact@davetrippinjapan.com. So if you have a question, please do send it there. Or if by chance you think that we might have a great conversation on the podcast and you'd like to be a guest, please do write me there as well. Set the contact on the website. If you go to the website, you can contact me there. But also that contact@davetrippinjapan.com is itself an email address. So you can do that. I've got two guests coming on. One is named Chai. I've got another good friend named Alex. Both of them have really, really interesting backgrounds. Chai does like a ton of really cool stuff with real estate in Kyoto. And that's just one part of his life. He's done some incredible travel, so I think it'll be a really cool conversation with him. And then my other friend Alex, I've actually mentioned several times on the podcast as well, is this incredible distiller. He's a distiller. He's working with the company called Kinobi Gin here in Kyoto, and they make this incredible craft gin. He's the man. He's the mad scientist that makes all the flavors so wonderful. So he'll be coming on the show. Probably this will be in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Alex will soon return to the UK, which makes me very, very sad. So I'll have to make sure I get that done before then. I'd like to hit him up before he leaves. That'll be great. So those are a couple of updates as well. I also, at the beginning and the end, I want to say thank you. To anyone who supports me on Patreon. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. It makes a world of difference. It's how smaller podcasts like mine continue to grow, remain independent, do better and better and better. So thank you so much, anyone who is supporting me there on Patreon as well. It's a slow process, but I have seen on the Interstice podcast YouTube channel, there's been a few more people are subscribing there, which is great. And just generally, there's this little bit of growth in life since we've been doing this more consistently every single week. I still should have had this out on Monday, but c'est la vie. Tuesday, one day after, no problem. Let's just get back on the horse for the next week. I've got my list here as well of different things that I could go through. As there is no guest today, we're going to return to the fact that I will just talk too much about anything. It can be, in this case, a useful skill. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, where I said before, I don't want to go too crazy with always talking about books, but I do love to read so much, and I'm on a great one now, and there was this incredible scene in it that I wanted to talk about that. So the book in question is one of these ones sort of in the pantheon of fantasy writing. There are certain books that are considered the pillars, foundational to what people think of the genre. Voices so loud that they cannot be ignored. This one is maybe a little bit more on the periphery of that. It's called Name of the Wind, but it has been really, really, really fascinating. And perhaps I mentioned this in a previous podcast. The author was endorsed by Ursula K Leguin, and Ursula K Leguin is someone who I respect an incredible amount, who I have an incredible amount of respect for. She was the first woman to win the Hugo Award for science fiction. Her writing, if you read it now, is incredibly original, the way in which she genre blends both fantasy and science fiction together. Very, very original. Very of its time, too. It has this kind of classic feeling to it, which is wonderful. But yeah, when I saw that she had endorsed the book, I knew it would be a good one to go into. So the scene that I'm thinking of, it had particularly to do with belief. There's this boy who, or I should allow me to frame this a little better for you. There's a main character who you meet at the beginning of the book, and when you meet him at the beginning of the book, he's a full-grown man, and there's a guy come to his town who wants to tell the story of his life, because apparently this main character is a really, really incredible person. He's not letting on. He seems quite humble, but he meets with the chronicler and says that, yeah, he would be willing to tell his story. And so then basically that's really what the book is about. It's going back in time from the point at which you meet the character and hearing him retell his story, how he became who he was. And in the course of his story, in the course of his development, you start as he is a child, and he is the family member of a musical troupe. His mother and father are these like wonderful people who are able to sing and dance and put on performances, and he's a part of that group. And it sounds honestly like a pretty idyllic life. They're like I wouldn't say upper crust, or perhaps you might. They have a patron who's very powerful, who makes sure that they have enough money to be able to do what they do. And they're of a much higher quality, I think, than just the average traveling troupe of performers. And along their travels, they run into a guy when they're in some town who... Abernathy? I can't remember his name, actually, which is funny. It'll come back when I check the book out again. But they come across this guy. And the main character, who at this point in the book, since you're starting his story, is still a boy, is yet a boy, notices that he seems to have some sort of command of the elements. There's a point where this character that I'm talking about now, that the main character meets, has come into the town, and he gets sort of accosted by the town guards, and he's able to intimidate them by using the wind, and you're not sure how. And that immediately intrigues the main character. He wants to know more about this. He wants to know, what is it that this guy can do that he knows the name of the wind, thus the name of the book. And he ingratiates himself to him and wants to learn from him. And this guy, this character who has now entered the troupe, he's an older man. He refers to himself as an arcanist, which I thought was very cool in light of recently having watched Arcane. So I was like, oh, here we got another arcane allusion here. And the way in which the magic in this world exists is very well grounded. It's really, really interesting. He's created quite like a system that in some ways, actually in many ways, it mirrors a sort of like scientific method or like scientific approach. Like it feels very believable. But there is within it this other training that he does. The main character with this older man who refers to himself as an arcanist. And that training has to do with a number of different mind states that you could enter into depending on what has happened to you, to be able to weather the storm, we'll say, to be able to like feel whatever emotion that is, or whatever trauma or thing. Maybe it's a good thing even, but you don't want to be overwhelmed by the emotion of it. And there's a number of different states that you can enter into. I think one is referred to as the stone state, or like the solid state, not to be confused with hard drives. And then there's one, for like emotional objectivity, a sort of mindfulness. But there is this one scene where they're talking about, well, let me just set it up and then I'll say what they're talking about, essentially. So the old man and the boy are talking, and the old man asks the boy to observe a rock. And he says to him, he holds out the rock. The old man holds out the rock, and he says to him, if I were to release this rock, what would happen? And the boy says, well, obviously it would fall to the ground. And the guy says, okay, that's good. So you're not at odds with reality. You don't mistake for what should happen. You know what should happen. Now that you know that, and now that we can agree that that is what should happen, I need you, with all your might, with all your focus, with all your will, believe the rock, when I release it from my hand, will, instead of fall, move upwards. And of course, the boy, when he hears this, he's like, well, that's insane. That's not what it does. And the guy says, essentially, like, what it does and what you believe are two different things. And that for anyone to have mastery of their kind of like their world, they need to be able to control their belief, because belief is such a powerful force for creation. And I loved it. I love this example of believing in something that is apparently not the case. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that sounds like self-delusion, and I think like a lot of times it is, when people just believe things that are not the way they actually are. But then again, I think there's a lot to do with belief. What the point of this book is making is that things do not exist which we might desire, which are wholly positive, but you must in some sense, your action is going to bring it into existence, but so much of your action is a result of what you've come to believe. So if you believe that you'll never be like a really, really successful person unless you had first had believed that you could be, unless you have really, really dumb, amazing luck and just you find yourself in a very undirected way ending up with massive wealth. So that can totally happen too. But when it's not just some huge fluke that's happening to you, well, then your control of your belief is essential for you to be able to craft your reality. And I loved this example, probably most of all because it was so simple. It is a rock, it will move down, believe that it will not, believe that it will move up. There is so little fat on that in terms of the philosophy of what the guy's trying to represent to the kid, which I thought was great. It's really original. I mean, you wonder whenever you read a fantasy book, like, what's this world going to be like? Is it just going to be like high fantasy? We're going to do the Tolkien thing. In what way will it differentiate itself and not just be some generic orcs and goblins kind of deal? So the way that this author, I think it's Patrick Rothfuss or something like that, the way in which he's crafted his world in regards to magic, in regards to belief, in regards to the philosophy of it, is very, very, very good. As soon as I could read that as well, I knew, I was like, well, there you go. That's an Ursula K Leguin endorsement. That was the most Ursula-like thing that I've read in the book so far, where she would make really, really beautiful, succinct philosophical points in the books that I've read of hers that were like kind of like this, where they're just clean, obvious, anyone could understand them, but at the same time that they felt very, very insightful, but explained so plainly, which was great. That expression, brevity is the soul of wit, is something that very much Ursula was in touch with, and this guy was here. It was the expression I like so much is an economy of prose. That in itself is good writing. So that was one story that I've had the pleasure of enjoying recently. I'll probably read a little bit more of that tonight. But then the other, and this one really, really, it's been amazing. And I'm like, just general reviews. It's so strange what happens to some great shows, some great books, in the way that they're reviewed. When I can tell you, I mean, I'm like reading books my entire life. Like, if there's one thing I know, it's stories. And the show that I'm talking about is called The Shrink Next Door. So let me, basically the show what I was just talking about a moment ago, what surprised me. This show has quite an unpopular rating. It's like 53%, I would say. And The Shrink Next Door is an Apple TV original. It's one of these new ones that's coming out from Apple. And it stars Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd. And Will Ferrell is the owner of this textile store. He's like making framing, something like that. And he's a bit of a mess. He has panic attacks. He's not confident in his life. He's inherited this business without feeling wholly confident that he's the guy who could actually take it somewhere. He relies heavily on his sister, who's this straight-talking, hard-as-nails, cool bitch, which I really, really enjoy, and she's an amazing character, and she's got his back really good. Will Ferrell's back. She's the sister looking after him, making sure he doesn't just like collapse at the first sign of stress. She's a great character, and it is her who suggests that, you know what, you have all these panic attacks, you're a quite insecure guy, why don't you go and see a therapist about this? And lo and behold, the therapist that he goes to see is Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd in this, I would have said at the beginning, the obvious main character to this story is it's Will Ferrell. He's the main character, of course. It's his business. He's the one with the psychological problems. But talking about psychological problems, he's definitely not the only one. I don't want to spoil it, but it's sort of self-evident, like right from the get-go, that it is not so clear that Paul Rudd has only the best interests of Will Ferrell at heart. And the writing is superb. The character that like both Paul Rudd and Will Ferrell have created are such fully developed characters. It reminds me of like Daniel Day-Lewis kind of stuff in terms of they just do not seem like themselves as you've seen them in other things. Basically, yeah, that's kind of the groundwork. And so incredible writing, beautiful to look at. There's like a coziness. It's interesting to watch it with my friend from New York because that's where it takes place. And they've got these like thick Jewish New York accents. I'm thinking that's where the accent is coming from. Jewishness is a like major characteristic in the whole story, definitely. And it's so good, and it got such a bad rating, and I found myself wondering again, like, what is it that ends with this result, where something is so, by every analytic, by every metric, is good and in like a really meaningful way. Maybe I'm actually coming to the conclusion. Maybe I'm figuring out why. Things that are good meaningfully do not always perform so well with mass appeal. So maybe that's what it is. I also wonder as well, because old Paul Rudd there, who does not necessarily have Will Ferrell's best intentions at mind, he's Jewish. So I was wondering, was there some kind of hesitancy? Like, it's a touchy subject when people create like negative Jewish characters. Now, you see Jewish people do it all the time. They poke fun at themselves, but I wonder if like some people's sensibilities were like, oh, don't entertain this idea of like, even if it is to say that this is an evil man who just so happens to be Jewish. I don't even think he's totally evil, but like, you get the point that I'm trying to make. I was like, oh, this is a hot potato right here, that you're gonna have even a debate-worthy, a character that's debatably like just a horrible person, and have it have to do with money, and have them be Jewish. I was like, wow, these writers are like, no, we know how to do this. We can do it intelligently. I think that is a challenge, to not be heavy-handed or too on the nose or like just straight up anti-Semitic if you're gonna make a storyline like that. So I thought that is another layer of cool to it, that was like, this is with difficulty and artfulness navigated, to be able to not have it just be like some horribly offensive thing or tone deaf or whatever else. And it's none of these. It's incredibly heartfelt. It's very, very charming. It makes it, for me, I hate seeing people get fucked. I hate that when you see them get screwed over. And the way in which that can occur in this show, totally, it just like makes my skin crawl. But then I feel that is, again, another sign of good writing, because they got to me. I'm not able to be completely objective of how uncomfortable it makes me to watch somebody who seems half decent get taken advantage of. So really, really, really good. And then shocking to discover that nobody is really down to clown when it comes to this show. I wonder as well, maybe it's just a question of exposure with Apple TV, but I think Apple TV is very, very, very popular. So I don't know what's going on. But if you want something that is very well done, coming at you again with a wonderful recommendation, it would be The Shrink Next Door. Another one that I'm going to hit up with my friends pretty soon here, which is just an absolute masterpiece and a gem, beautifully animated, informed by an Eastern and Western sensibility in the sort of art style they had, and the one comic book that I ever collected in my entire life, and that's Spawn, written by Todd McFarlane, our East Coast hockey, baseball-loving Todd McFarlane in Canada. What incredible, incredible series of comics that was. And they did an HBO series, which is like masterpiece, total masterpiece level. The actual live action movie is incredibly uneven. They just couldn't get a budget. You could see it is charming in that it can still be as good as it was. Well, it was so bad. It was really, really interesting. So interesting that the live action movie. There's like, I know you could go into great like conversation. Like so much of it is like horrendous, but then some parts you're like, this is awesome. It's so good. Anyways, though, I'm talking about the animated series, where I'd always hoped, I was like, oh, I wonder if they could do a live action or a visual, not visual media is obviously the comics, but yeah, an animation adaptation of it. And the HBO series, the 3 seasons, I believe it's 3 seasons, is just like, wow, chef's kiss. Incredibly good. So good. And so I was checking that out with my friends. We watched 5 minutes of the other day. They were like, this is such a masterpiece. We got to wait for our buddy to get back. He's at weddings in Scotland right now. And when he does get back from that, then we'll all watch it together. So I was like, that's a glowing review. That's one that I appreciate, which is really, really cool. And I could tell, of course, so quickly, they were like, this is really good. And it's great to revisit again, where sometimes you're not sure. Like, there was a movie recently I rewatched, The Equalizer, with Denzel Washington. Did not hold up. I mean, there were really, really cool elements to it, but it was actually, not surprisingly, when they leaned a little too heavily into some effects in it, where I was like, oh, this should have been done practical. The effects in this make it look so dated. So to be able to see Spawn again, and then within 5 minutes confirm, oh yes, this was the masterpiece that it was at the time that I saw it. It is timeless, ageless, and that I'll get to watch it with my great friends is something that I'm really, really looking forward to. I wanted to talk as well about updates for the wakeboard thing, because this is going to be like the wakeboard thing. Well, what's that? We're going down to Kyushu in August. We're going to film a Japan Wakeboard Association tournament with Garden Lab, Studio Garden Lab. And a part of that recently, the efforts we've had, is that we went down to Hiroshima. I talked about this in the previous podcasts. And once there, we sort of practiced the filming, because we've never done something like this before. It was all very successful. And then since then, they've wanted us to create videos wherein we would show them how we would make it look, our version essentially. They gave us reference materials like, hey, this is how it would look. These are how we want the riders to look, this, that, and the other thing. And now just today, we've done 3 different edits for them to achieve that. At first, it was like, hey, here's a cool edit. And then they said, could you do something that might look a little bit more exactly how the tournament would look? I said, of course. And then they said, once they got that, actually, here's a list of exactly how it should look in the tournament. Would you be able to do that now? So there, we did. I actually did that earlier today. So that's something. As we get nearer, it feels good to hammer out these other things, because as a new project, there is a little apprehension. Doing anything new, of course. I mean, that's good. That excitement, that cortisol, that norepinephrine is what makes you remember while you're stressing, and like leaves a lasting impression upon you. But these are chemical transmitters that are also associated with stress. So it's this sword is cutting both ways right now, where I'm really excited for it, but I am nervous, but I'm good about that nervousness. So it should be no problem. But we're moving ahead with all the different planning for it. Very, very soon I will have my new camera, because I couldn't go to Scotland. Drew's going to pick it up for me. And that will be a real turning of the page, a next chapter of what the, at least visually, who knows what I'll do in terms of like story, or like more narratively focused videos, or whatever it might be. Who knows? I'm just throwing those out. I don't even know what the videos will be that I create in the future. But how they're going to look is going to be something of an intense upgrade once I get this new camera. Now, you probably only see the corner of it here if you're watching the video, or not at all. But man, it is crazy just talking about little slice of life stuff when I'm here in Kyoto. Rainy season, I could have sworn should have been over by this point, but it's not. And we had today just the most torrential downpour. It was nice though. I'd like gone to the gym, came out, and that's when it went really crazy. And when you're in that post-gym chilled out mindset, even flooding levels of rain is kind of like this peaceful thing. And if you don't mind being a little bit wet, then it is quite humid already. You're already wet, so it's like let's just throw on another layer to this. And because it's raining and the sun's not out, it's actually relatively cool. It's still clammy and brutal, but Nothing like if the sun were out and you were experiencing that humidity. So you're kind of, it's like you're swimming down the street. You're swimming down the street as you walk. That's what it's like. And then when you go and look at the Kamogawa features is like the main river that goes through Kyoto that everybody likes to sit next to and have a beer or eat some snacks. They actually even have a name romantically. It's like Kamo Kaporu. So Kamo couple, Kamogawa couple. So you go and sit next to the Kamogawa with your drink, and you romance the one that you are interested in, or you just hang out with friends and smoke cigarettes. It's a mixed bag depending on who you are, what you decide to do. But it's really, really, really nice. Okay, let's call that part 1. We're gonna jump into part 2 here, and we got some cool stuff to discuss. And away we go. What will take up this second portion? Well, there's 2 things I wanted to talk about. There's one sort of more like just in passing, and then the other that I wanted to talk about in detail because it was it was a bit of a revelation when it came to me realizing some details about it. So the first one was The Boys. There's the 3rd season that's out now, and I don't want to. I'll be very careful to. I'll be very, very careful not to spoil anything because I know it's a very popular show and you may want to see it yourself. But it's just it's like a philosophical question I have about it, where I'm really, really curious about the basically the writer and the directors, if there's like multiple directors, if it's one, or basically where it has such a clear vision of what it wants to be. It is tonally incredibly consistent from what I can tell. When you watch The Boys, you know that there is a way that the dialogue is going to be. You know that there is a way that the action is going to be. And perhaps most of all, and this is the thing that intrigues me the most, is there is a way that the violence is going to be. I think, for the most part, in this show, I'm going to spoil something from the 2nd season, so not the most recent, to be careful, but that's a warning for you. And it's a detail of action. It's not particularly, I don't know, maybe this could be thought of as plot heavy, but to make the point, so the sort of violence that I see in that show is the kind that seems to be it knows that it is like way over the top, crazy violent. It knows this. And not only does it know it, it's usually leveraging it to be funny. It's a dark comedy. I don't think that's complicated. I think that's clearly what it's trying to be. But man, I won't call it the mistake. I was just like, I'm curious because I know these things about what I've said already about the show that I cannot help myself. I wanted to see all the deaths so far that have occurred in season 3 of the show. And wow, like when you watch these deaths, it does kind of reach a point where I was, one in particular, without, you could choose anyone, I suppose. There's so many of them. I would jump back quickly to make the point about like how it's a dark comedy. Like there's one scene from the 2nd season where they have like a baby that has become a super powered baby, and it shoots laser beams from its eyes like Superman would. But the main character, the bearded dude, whoever plays, he's like the engineer in Star Trek or whatever. I can't remember if they made him the Doctor. Maybe he was Bones. He was playing Bones. He uses the baby as like a shield, and it's like laser beam ability to like slice through all these people when he's in a compound, and it's hilarious. Using a laser shooting baby to hyper violently kill a bunch of people. That's something I find hilarious. I like that. It's funny. But when I was watching some of the deaths in the most recent season, it made me want to reach out to the writer or the director, whoever it is that has like made this decision to do it this way. Just ask them, are you okay? Because it definitely borderlines on, I get almost this feeling of like, this is funny, but it is also incredible. It's like, it's funny because it's disturbing, right? That's the mentality, but then it's leaned so far into disturbing. I wonder, is there the same humor there? Is there the same sense of humor there that's creating these hyper violent images as there was before? I don't know. It really does make me want to ask the question. I'm not sure, but it's all in fun. I'm only curious. I mean, I know that there are people who are doing stuff like that, and I was also making a friend, and they intend it in a really creative way. And I was talking to a friend the other day as well, where I think it is hard to always know until you do it. Pardon me, it's late in the day recording this. It's hard to know until you do it exactly how something that you first write and then storyboard, how that's really going to look when you finally get to the end result, where it might only be when you get to the end result where you're like, yeah, it's a little more fucked up than we thought. Just like the baby like with the laser beams from its eyes cutting people in two. I mean, that seems really, really funny. You execute, you see, you're like, oh, that's hilarious. But then you do another one of these things and you're like, we thought it was funny. It's less funny than it is just incredibly, incredibly grotesque. So I don't know. I find that interesting. I watched like the first season. I thought it was pretty good. I do find it also a little bit uneven when I watch some of their action, but I don't think the action in the show is the point. I really do think like it is definitely the plot of The Boys, which people are finding, most interesting, and that's what they're most getting into when they want to check it out. So really, really cool stuff. Just food for thought, where I was like, I wonder what is the mental state of the production team that is coming up with what you are seeing there. Now, on to something new. I wonder maybe this will actually get a few comments if people are watching this on the YouTube channel, because it'll strike a nerve for the sort of like, late 20s, mid 30s sort of audience, maybe even older for people who are older as well. But one of my favorite movies, and I'm going to watch it again soon. I've got like a great 4K Blu-ray version of it now. And when I grew up with it, it was amazing. What I named my YouTube gaming channel, when I used to do that before, was the Secret of Nim. And it's this story about Mrs. Brisby. Mrs. Brisby is a field mouse. Her husband is dead. She's looking after her family as a widow in the field. And her son has become sick from a spider bite. And she has to do whatever she can, because she's a wonderful mother, to be able to heal her child and survive in this field. Because there's this thing called moving day, where the plow comes through the field, and if you're not moved, then you're just going to get eaten by the plow. So it's like a thing that everybody has to do every year. They always migrate. They're sort of nomadic. But if you aren't in the shape to do so, then it's kind of sink or swim. You're going to die. And that's sort of the premise of it. Always loved this. Then there was another movie from my youth. There's another one. And I believe this actually, maybe there's another, but I think that this originates the Mufasa scene. And when I say that, I mean that a scene wherein what is important is that a up-and-coming, a youthful character usually loses someone who, until that time, was how they felt safe in the world. So in the case of Lion King, it was Mufasa. That's Simba's father. It was like he felt protected so long as Mufasa was there. But he loses that protection. He loses not only the protection, but he also loses how that voice was a guide for his personal growth. Now, there's this other movie, Land Before Time, about these dinosaurs. Well, basically, like at this, extinction event. It seems like the dinosaurs are going extinct. And near the beginning of the movie, Littlefoot, I think it's a Diplodocus, the type of dinosaur, these big, long tail, big fat body, big, long neck. They get called long necks, I think, in the movie. He loses his mother, and it was gut-wrenching as a child. Absolutely gut-wrenching to see this. Incredibly, incredibly sad. But very, very powerful. Amazing. Absolutely loved it. Go further on in my history, and I watched, or maybe not further on, but there's another movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven. Incredible, heartfelt movie. Very dark at times, quite literally not literally dark, but quite so that that you had the main character, which is a dog, Charlie, he's past due. He's supposed to die, but he doesn't die. But there's circumstances that mean, unless something particularly good happens or he circumvents the way the rules are, that he should have to go to hell. And there's a scene in All Dogs Go to Heaven where Charlie goes to hell. And I'm thinking, that was a weird thing to watch as a kid. But it was incredible. There was such deep emotion and heart and feeling like it mattered and had a real message to tell you. The same with The Land Before Time. The same with The Secret of Nim. Another one. This is an animated, I believe Matt Damon was actually the voice of the main character, Titan A.E. So Titan After Earth. It was this sort of ahead of its time a little bit, or one of the first animations that were blending more the CG with the traditional animation style, kind of like Treasure Planet, to be completely honest. And it was amazing too. It was more of just a complete adventure movie that you would watch, whereas these other ones, they were adventure, but they were like distinctly more to do with like being emotionally distraught or challenges. And so Titan A is just a little bit more fun. And what I discovered... Oh, and Robin Hood. Let me name another one. Robin Hood, if you've ever seen this, it's where like the fox is actually... It's the anthropomorphized characters playing all the characters of Robin Hood. So it's a fox that plays Robin Hood. It's a bear that plays Little John. This looms large in my childhood. It's like all of these were so good, and they stand up today. You could watch them today, and they have a special kind of magic that I have never seen reproduced. Probably the closest thing to it would be Pixar, but Pixar, in a way that is beautiful unto itself, is so bright often. I mean, I'm sure somebody could pick out one of the darker, more pathos-filled episodes of Pixar film, but it's not usually the direction that they go. Toy Story, it's just all heart, it's all happy. I mean, maybe, and if not that, the way in which they get dark is usually like a little bit funny. If you watch WALL-E, the horror in that is that people have become so useless in WALL-E that they become, immobile. They move around their spaceship or whatever it is that only on like mobile, like easy chairs or whatever you want to call it. And so that's horrible, but it's also kind of funny. Whereas there was just this like darkness in these other ones. And I just discovered recently, I had no idea that it is the same director that did all of these, where I thought it was more just an era of animation where whoever was doing it were kind of like in tune with the time, and all the producers of art at that time were creating just great things. They were all consistently awesome, whether it was Land Before Time, whether it was Secret of Nim. But in actuality, it was one guy that was creating all of this stuff, and it gave me a new appreciation for all of them, that they could have such a cohesiveness to the themes and the emotional maturity. I think maybe that's the best way. When you read about it, you'll often hear that expression thrown out when it comes to these Don Bluth directed films, is there's an incredible emotional maturity, and I feel like as well there's trusting the audience, trusting the younger audience that might watch them to be able to engage with it in a meaningful way. There's scary parts, and I don't think you should ever watch if you were too young watching some of these animations. But I was, and I turned out okay. Maybe. They're just incredible. I've written down here. Yeah, it was Titan A.E., Robin Hood, Land Before Time. What are the Secret of Nim, ADGTH. I don't know what that one was supposed to be. I got this abbreviation here. But it's really struck me, and it's made me actually want to then seek out animations that I got mixed up, that I think, well, they were this director, but I didn't realize it at the time. For example, Anastasia Anastasia got great reviews. I think people really, really, really liked it. But when I saw it come out, I thought that it was Disney. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about this one. I'm not sure if I'm really into it. Not that Disney does a ton of great stuff, but I didn't know that. So it's also been able to aid me in providing a new direction for what I might check out next. And it was so cool to see that this common thread in my life as I was growing up was created by one consistent voice. I'm blown away by the artistic significance of that guy, that he would have done all of these. Now, it sounds like as he went on later into his career into the 90s that some of that heart went out of it. Some of it wasn't quite as good, which is fair. I mean, I love artists who are good, who create these great things, almost like as much for their failures as I do for their successes. Like, it's the sign of an incredible artist that they'll hit a huge one that's amazing and it succeeds on every level that you might enjoy a story, and in the next one it fails miserably. But how it spectacularly fails kind of indicates the scale of their ambition. They don't swing small. They're gonna win in grand style, or they're gonna lose in grand style, but they give it their all, even if that is to fail. I think a parallel that I could draw for this would be the Wachowski sisters from The Matrix. And I'm like, I've said this before too, like, obviously the first, it's the foundation, it's the pillar. A lot of people didn't like the second and third so much. I didn't even think they were in the same ballpark as the first one, but I still respected them. I thought that they were pretty good. But then they go and release something like Jupiter Ascending, which gotta be one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, just so unfocused and bland, and it's got Redmayne in there, I believe, who's gone on to the Fantastical Beasts fame and so on. He's a good actor. But yeah, it was just there was no profoundness to it at all. It seemed like really cheap and glitzy. I wonder how much a hold of the studio got on it to prevent them from being as clear with their vision, or if they didn't have enough time, whatever it may have been. But it was just bad. But I loved it. I came out of there, I was like, I enjoyed just how insanely bad that was. That was brutal. And then they released something like Cloud Atlas. And Cloud Atlas, although they did that in collaboration with another director, Cloud Atlas is probably in my one of my top 5 favorite movies that I've ever seen, which is awesome. It was so good. So they're not totally even, but they're just doing their damnedest to create something that's exceptional, even if it's exceptionally bad. Talking about, actually, let's do one more. I have seen one more recently, which I'd really want to recommend to people. I'm going to rewatch it again because I think it would be such a fun boys' night with with my friends here. The one that I would recommend is I think it's called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, something like that. And it is a new film from Nicolas Cage. I've seen some killer ones from Nicolas Cage, actually. Maybe, if it was 2021 when I watched Pig, then that was easily one of the best films of the whole year that I saw. He's crushing it. And then there's this one, which is, I hope I didn't talk about this in the podcast before last. Anyways, who cares? Maybe somebody missed that. This is your reminder to check it out. It's that he's not playing actually totally himself. It's sort of it's a caricature of himself. And he's down. He's considering quitting acting, and then he gets invited by this guy to come and visit him. And little does he know, this guy has a script that he wants to read, and he wants to make a movie with him. And I think it's Pablo Pascal or whatever, the guy who's in Game of Thrones, who eventually gets his head crushed by the mountain. I believe he was also the drug cartel guy. And then more recently, he's been cast as Joel, which I think will be amazing for The Last of Us. This movie was hilarious. It was so funny. It was really well acted. it was a great meta commentary, like, on making a film. It was really, really playful and fun in terms of Nicolas Cage's own impression of himself. I think if there was this, definitely where something like this could have been a character assassination for him. It did the exact opposite. He didn't look full of himself. He seemed very, very aware of, the goofiness and the craziness of his life, and the art in which he participates. And it was so funny and so much fun, and it just, like, carried you along. When I think of another movie that I watched recently where there was a similar effect to this, it would be Knives Out. Movies do different things for you. They move you. They make you laugh, they make you cry, they scare you, they excite you. This definitely felt like fun. That's what it was. It was like, this is a romp. This is fun. This is more than funny. This is fun. And I really, really, really enjoyed that. It was great. Sandro and I, my friend, he's a real cinemaphile. We're always checking in on these. He's always got a big list of stuff that we should not miss. The next I think that we'll try and watch is called just Men, I think. And it is from the director of Ex Machina, who's amazing. That movie's amazing if you haven't seen that. It's so, so, so good. This was a lot of fun. Gonna cut it a little bit short this week. It's been busy, but I feel I'm lacking for topics, so I apologize for that. We'll be fresh at it again in the next week. I hope you stick with me. I hope we go all the way to 1,000 episodes. All in good time. All in good time. Thank you again to those who support me on Patreon. You guys are awesome. I got to say it at the beginning. I got to say it at the end. If you don't already support me there, please do consider doing so. If you enjoy the content, there'll be much more of it to come. If you want to contact me, if you want to ask me a question, again, that's contact@davetrippinjapan.com. That's all for number 59.